Imagine sitting in a packed stadium, 70,000 eyes swirling around you like a living ocean, every screen, every camera, every whisper magnifying your existence, when suddenly the person you love most, your own son, turns to you, his face twisted with contempt, his hand clutching a cup of beer not as refreshment but as a weapon, and he splashes it directly into your face while hissing through clenched teeth. You've achieved nothing in life. The beer is cold, sticky, humiliating, but the words are colder, sharper, more brutal than any liquid could ever be, because they are not coming from a stranger, not from some rival or critic or heckler, but from the very mouth of the boy you once carried on your shoulders, the boy whose laughter used to echo through your home like music, the boy for whom you gave up sleep, comfort, opportunities, luxuries, and years of your own ambition. In an instant, the stadium erupts in laughter, not because they know the story, not because they have lived your sacrifices, but because pain, when projected on a giant screen, becomes entertainment, and your humiliation becomes their halftime show. Yet what he didn't know, what none of them knew, and what the world was about to discover, is that the man he had just called a failure, the man they mocked as ordinary, had once been extraordinary, had once been the name on everyone's lips, had once been a legend. This is not just a story about embarrassment, it is a story about hidden greatness, about pride and betrayal, about a father and son entangled in a web of love and resentment, about respect that had been forgotten but would soon return in the most dramatic way possible. A shocking revelation that silenced an entire stadium. Welcome to a world where success is not measured by bank accounts or cars in the driveway, but by sacrifice, by choices, by the kind of character that cannot be bought or borrowed. Welcome to a world where respect is never given, it must be earned. But to understand how I reached that humiliating moment, drenched in beer and laughter, you must return with me to the quiet rhythms of my home, to the hum of an old vacuum cleaner tracing lines across a modest carpet, to a life that seemed too ordinary to be respected but was built on a foundation of hard labor and deeper meaning. Saturday mornings had always been mine. When Maria was alive, we used to sip coffee together on those mornings, sunlight pouring through clean windows, her laughter soft as the breeze. After she passed, the mornings became quieter but no less sacred. The vacuum's steady hum filled the silence like a form of meditation, reminding me that order, discipline, and care had not abandoned me, even if loneliness sometimes did. That morning I guided the machine around the worn leather chair Maria had chosen 15 years earlier, a chair that had become my reading spot, my resting place, my anchor. As I wrapped the cord around the hooks, I felt the comfort of routine, simple, modest, but mine. Then the air shifted, pierced by a sound that did not belong to my peaceful world, the growl of an expensive engine tearing through the stillness. I looked out the window and saw it, a sleek silver Tesla sliding into my driveway like a symbol of another life, a world that valued speed and appearances more than roots and substance. My stomach tightened, because I knew that sound belonged to my son Gregory, and Gregory did not come by unannounced anymore, not unless something was wrong. The door opened without a knock, without courtesy, and in walked my son, not as a visitor returning home with warmth, but as an inspector evaluating a property. He wore crisp khakis, a navy polo shirt that screamed designer, leather loafers too polished to have ever felt the dust of real work. His eyes swept the living room, not with nostalgia but with judgment, every glance a silent condemnation of the life I lived. "Dad, why are you still cleaning yourself?" he asked, his tone heavy with irritation, as though my vacuum were not a symbol of self-reliance but of shame. "Couldn't you hire a housekeeper?" I turned off the vacuum, and the silence made his words heavier, like stones dropped in water. I took my time winding the cord, searching his face, noticing the dark circles beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the arrogance in his posture. "I like maintaining order with my own hands," I said finally, the words steady, simple, honest. But honesty had little value in Gregory's world anymore. He walked across the room and sank into my reading chair without invitation, his body language declaring ownership, his gaze sweeping the room like a real estate appraiser calculating square footage. "You live like a retiree," he said with disdain, as if retirement were a crime. as if decades of labor and sacrifice could not justify a season of peace. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my 65 years pressing against his accusation. I am a retiree. I worked 40 years. I earned this. But Gregory laughed, sharp and humorless, cutting into me like broken glass. And that's exactly the problem. The words stung deeper than I wanted to admit, not because I believed them, but because I saw in his eyes not just disappointment but contempt. He began pacing the room, his footsteps echoing like a restless predator circling its prey. His hands gestured sharply toward my furniture, my bookshelf, my modest television, my photographs. Look at this place. Look at yourself. You've given up on ambition, on growth, on mattering. When was the last time you did something that actually made a difference? My pulse quickened. Memories of construction sites, of weekend shifts, of aching muscles and dirty hands rose in me. I had built, I had given, I had mattered. Maybe not to the world's stage, but to him, to Maria, to our family. I put you through UCLA. I paid for your education. I helped you start your business, I said, gripping the vacuum handle like it was the only anchor keeping me steady. I gave you every chance to become the man you are today. Gregory stopped pacing and turned, his face twisted with something uglier than arrogance. Every chance? He snapped. I had to fight for everything despite your limitations, not because of your help. Those weren't investments, Dad. Those were guilt payments. You didn't give me anything real. No connections. No network. No example of success. Look around you. This is what settling looks like. This is failure. His words hit like a slap. My home, filled with decades of memories, the house Maria and I had built, shrank under his contempt. I saw not my son but a stranger wearing his features, a man who measured worth in money and prestige, blind to the sacrifices that had built his foundation. The anger rose in me, deep and unfamiliar, a voice I hadn't used in decades pushing its way to the surface. Get out, I said, my voice shaking not with fear but with a fury long suppressed. Get out of my house. Until you learn to respect your father, you are not welcome here. For the first time, his arrogance faltered, shock flashing across his face, but it hardened quickly, sealing into a mask of superiority. Fine, he spat. I don't need this pathetic place anyway. He stormed out, slamming the door so violently the frames rattled on the walls. And then there was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the vacuum still standing in the middle of the room. I sank into my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared at the photographs on the side table. Gregory as a boy, Maria's smile, our family frozen in moments of joy that felt like another life. My chest ached, my hands trembled, my heart whispered questions to the ghost of my wife. What did I do wrong? Did I fail him? Did I raise a son who could not see the value of what I gave? The days that followed were slow and painful. I moved through the motions of life, gardening, reading, cooking simple meals, but every quiet moment was filled with the echo of Gregory's words. Ordinary. Nothing. Failure. I sat with Maria's photo at night, speaking to her as though she could answer, asking her if I had been too soft, too strict, too blind. I found her letters, the ones she had written when Gregory was 12, reminding me that respect had to be taught, that love without boundaries was not love at all, that we were not just raising a child but a future man. Her words steadied me. My best friend Frank added his own wisdom, telling me that blood does not excuse cruelty, that even sons must learn respect, that sometimes the greatest act of love is to wait, to hold your ground, to let them come back when they are ready. And so I waited, 1 day, 2 days, a week, each morning heavy, each night longer, the house too quiet, the temptation to call him almost unbearable. But I waited. Then one evening, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt and my breath caught as I opened the door to see Gregory standing there, his posture softer, his voice lower, his eyes carrying something that looked like remorse. Dad, he said, almost whispering. Forgive me. I said terrible things, cruel things. I didn't mean them. I want to make amends. He reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 glossy tickets. Rams game, this Sunday. Good seats, let's go together, start fresh. The sight of those tickets, the tremble in his voice, the hope in his eyes, it cracked my defenses. Against all logic, against the memory of his words, I let hope in again, fragile but alive. I believed maybe this was his way back, maybe this was our chance. Sunday arrived crisp and bright, the sky impossibly blue, the air alive with energy. Gregory's Tesla pulled into the driveway at exactly 11 a.m., and this time he smiled warmly. This time the car door opened with an invitation rather than intrusion. We drove to Sophie Stadium, talking like we used to, small talk flowing easily, laughter tentative but real. The stadium itself was a marvel, gleaming curves and steel, a palace built with billions, a temple for the game I had once known so intimately. Our seats were extraordinary, section 133, row 12, close enough to see the fire in the players' eyes, high enough to study the strategy unfolding. Gregory bought me a beer, handed it to me with a smile, and for a moment I let myself believe we were rebuilding. I thanked him sincerely, but beneath his smile I saw it, the nervous tapping of his fingers against the cup, the way his eyes flicked to his phone, the tension in his jaw. Something was wrong. And then as the first quarter roared to life, he leaned close and whispered words that shattered the fragile peace. "Dad, I need your help, financial help. $50,000. The number hit me like cold water. 50,000. More than my pension, more than I had in savings. I shook my head, gently, firmly. "I don't have that kind of money, son." His face darkened, shifting from desperation to anger. He accused me of hiding wealth, of being selfish, of failing him again. The more I refused, the more bitter he became, until finally, unable to contain his rage, he stood up, raised the beer, and in front of 70,000 people, in front of cameras and screens, he hurled it into my face. The cold liquid soaked me, the words louder than the roar of the crowd. "You've achieved nothing in life." Laughter erupted like thunder, strangers pointing, phones recording, the jumbotron magnifying my humiliation for all to see. I sat there, drenched, heartbroken, soul crushed, as my son reduced me to nothing. And yet, even as the laughter rose, even as the crowd mocked, something else was stirring on the field, something my son could never have predicted, something that would transform humiliation into revelation. Because while the spectators laughed, the players on the sideline had recognized me, and their voices were about to change everything. The laughter of 70,000 people still echoed in my ears, every chuckle and jeer stabbing deeper into my chest as beer dripped from my chin, soaking my shirt, turning me into the spectacle of Sophie Stadium, and my son stood there, chest heaving, eyes blazing, proud of the humiliation he had delivered to the father who had once sacrificed everything for him. My humiliation wasn't private anymore. It had become entertainment for strangers. A viral clip in the making, the kind of moment people record and send to friends with mocking captions. I wanted to sink into the chair, to disappear into the sticky floor beneath me, to vanish from a world where the boy I raised could weaponize my sacrifices against me. But then, amid the cacophony of laughter, a strange shift occurred. Not in the crowd at first, but on the field itself. Down on the sidelines, players had paused their drills, eyes fixed on the jumbotron, their expressions puzzled, curious, then stunned. One of them, a young quarterback named Jamal Hayes, furrowed his brow and pointed at the screen. "Terrell, look at that guy, the one getting drenched. Isn't that?" The linebacker he addressed, Terrell Brooks, followed his gaze and gasped, his eyes widening. "No way. That's Waldo Cruz. That's him." The name spread like wildfire along the sideline, bouncing from player to player, veteran to rookie, disbelief turning to excitement. Within seconds, half the Rams roster was staring at my face on the giant screen, trying to reconcile the image of a beer-soaked retiree being mocked by his son with the memory of highlight reels, championship games, and moments etched into NFL history. Jamal Hayes, his heart racing, snatched a wireless microphone from a sidelined crew member, ignoring the puzzled officials waving at him, and jogged toward our section. The crowd's laughter faltered as they noticed the commotion, their jeers giving way to murmurs of curiosity. The cameras followed him, confused, until his voice suddenly boomed through the stadium sound system, commanding silence with authority no one expected. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, resonant, echoing across every seat, "could I have your attention, please?" The ripple was immediate. The laughter died. Conversations ceased. Even Gregory froze, beer cup still clutched in his trembling hands. "The man you've been watching on the screen," Hayes continued, pointing directly toward me, "the man being disrespected by his own son." His voice sharpened here, the words slicing through the tension. That man is Waldo Cruz. The name fell like a thunderclap. The stadium went still. You could feel 70,000 people holding their breath, confusion and recognition colliding. Hayes' voice grew stronger, more passionate. Yes, that Waldo Cruz, NFL legend, three-time Super Bowl champion, Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the greatest players to ever hold the ball. The transformation was instant. Where moments ago there had been laughter and mockery, now there was a stunned silence, the kind that only falls when people realize they've been blind to greatness standing right in front of them. Terrell Brooks, unable to hold back, took the microphone next, his deep voice carrying reverence. I grew up studying this man. Waldo Cruz threw for over 30,000 yards, 200 touchdowns. He completed 63% of his passes over a 12-year career. He led 3 different teams to Super Bowl victories. He is one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever grace this field. Murmurs swept through the stadium like waves, spreading recognition, awe, shock. Fans pulled out their phones, not to laugh anymore, but to Google my name, to confirm the stats, to remind themselves of games their fathers had told them about. Some gasped as images flashed on their screens. Me, younger, stronger, in uniform, hoisting trophies, carving defenses with precision passes. Hayes raised the microphone again, his eyes locked on me with respect. Waldo Cruz retired in 1994, not because he couldn't play, but because of a knee injury that threatened to cripple him for life. He walked away from the game at the height of his career, not because he was finished, but because he valued his family more than fame. He chose his son over another season of glory. His words hit me harder than Gregory's beer ever could. For decades I had hidden my past, choosing to live as a father, as a husband, as a man of quiet dignity, rather than as a celebrity clinging to past victories. And now, in one of the darkest moments of my life, the truth was being unveiled before thousands. Hayes lifted his arm, gesturing toward me. "Mr. Cruz, will you please stand? This stadium deserves to know the truth." My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, but slowly I rose. Gregory's eyes widened, his jaw slack, disbelief painted across his face. The Jumbotron zoomed in, capturing my soaked shirt, my weathered face, my trembling hands, and the crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in thunderous applause. A standing ovation rippled across Sophie Stadium, 70,000 people rising to their feet, clapping, cheering, chanting my name. "Waldo, Waldo, Waldo!" The sound shook the very foundations of the stadium. Tears blurred my vision as I looked around, overwhelmed. The humiliation of minutes ago washed away in a flood of respect I hadn't felt in decades. My son, the boy who had called me nothing, sat frozen beside me, staring as though seeing me for the first time, trying to reconcile the father he dismissed with the legend the world revered. The microphone was passed hand to hand through the crowd until it reached me, and as I held it, it felt both foreign and familiar, like gripping a football again after years away. My voice, when it came, surprised even me with its steadiness. "Thank you," I began, my words carried by the sound system across the sea of faces. "Yes, I am Waldo Cruz. I played quarterback in the NFL from 1982 to 1994, 3 Super Bowl victories, Hall of Fame class of 1999. The crowd roared, but I raised my hand asking for silence. This moment wasn't about statistics, it was about truth. I retired because of an injury that could have left me crippled, but I also retired because I had something more important waiting for me at home. A 3-year-old son who needed a father more than the world needed another season from an aging quarterback." Gasps rippled through the crowd, sympathy and respect intertwining. I chose family over fame. I chose to work construction jobs, to paint houses, to do whatever it took to provide, because being Gregory's father meant more to me than being the public's hero. I looked down at my son as I spoke his name, and his face was pale, his eyes glassy, his lips trembling. The boy who had mocked me now looked like a man crumbling under the weight of his own blindness. "Some of you ask," I continued, my voice carrying with conviction, "why didn't I tell my son about my career? Why let him think I was ordinary? Because I wanted him to respect me not for what I did on the field, but for who I was at home. I wanted him to understand that a man's worth isn't measured in money or fame, but in character, in sacrifice, in love. I wanted him to see that dignity lies in how you live when no one is watching." The stadium was silent now. hanging on every word. Even the players, warriors in their own right, stood still, listening to the lesson unfolding before them. I turned to Gregory, who was trembling, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Dad, forgive me, I didn't know." His apology wasn't for the crowd. It was for me, raw and real. "You know now," I said softly into the microphone so the world could hear. "The question is what you will do with that knowledge." Gregory stood slowly, tears streaming down his cheeks, his arrogance stripped away, his pride shattered. He looked at me with the eyes of a boy again, not the hardened businessman, and he said, his voice trembling, "I'm proud to be your son. I should have known it without needing 70,000 people to tell me." The crowd murmured, moved by the sight of a son humbled, a father vindicated, a family scarred but healing. I turned back to the crowd, my voice rising with the strength of a quarterback commanding his team. "Respect," I declared, "is not something you buy with expensive cars or fancy clothes. It is not something you demand by humiliating others. Respect is earned, day by day, through sacrifice, through love, through consistency. I earned my place in football history, yes, but more importantly, I earned my place as a father by showing up, by giving everything I had, by choosing family over glory." The applause that followed was deafening, rolling through the stadium like thunder, not just for touchdowns or victories, but for values, for truth, for a reminder that greatness isn't always loud. It is often quiet, steady, unrecognized until it is tested. I handed back the microphone, my heart heavy but proud, my shirt still damp but my spirit cleansed. The crowd kept cheering, chanting my name, while Gregory stood beside me, broken and rebuilding, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. For the first time in years, I felt his grip not as entitlement, not as expectation, but as genuine connection. He leaned close, whispering through his tears, "How do I make this right?" I squeezed his hand firmly, my voice steady. "You start by remembering this moment, and you never again confuse net worth with self-worth." The crowd roared again, the lesson echoing through the stadium. The game eventually resumed, but for us, football had already given its greatest gift, not touchdowns or trophies, but reconciliation, truth, respect. And as we walked out of Sophie Stadium together, father and son, side by side, the sun warm on our faces, I knew that though my career had ended decades ago, my true legacy was only just beginning. As Gregory and I walked out of Sophie Stadium that unforgettable afternoon, the chants of "Waldo, Waldo" still echoing behind us like thunder rolling across the California sky, I felt the weight of decades lift off my shoulders, not because the world had rediscovered me, not because strangers now applauded a name they had forgotten, but because my son, the boy I had raised, and the man who had wounded me, finally saw me for who I truly was, not the ordinary retiree he mocked, not the failure he accused me of being, but the father who had sacrificed everything so that he could stand tall. The sun bathed us in golden light as we crossed the parking lot, and for the first time in years, we weren't just two people bound by blood. We were father and son again. Gregory walked quietly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes red from tears, his posture no longer proud and stiff but humble, softened, almost childlike. "Dad," he whispered, his voice raw, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I stopped walking, placed a hand on his shoulder, and looked directly into his eyes that mirrored my own but carried years of arrogance and pain. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I said. "It's about love. And no matter what you've said or done, you'll always be my son." His chin quivered, and he nodded slowly, swallowing back emotion he had long denied. That night, back in my modest home, the house that once felt heavy with silence now pulsed with something new, hope. Gregory sat in Maria's old chair, staring at her photograph, tears slipping silently down his face. "She would be ashamed of me," he said softly. "No," I corrected. "She would be grateful you finally remembered what matters." For the first time, he asked me about her, not the mother who packed his lunches or cheered at his games, but the woman who stood beside me when I decided to walk away from football. The woman who understood that greatness on the field meant nothing if I failed as a husband and father. I told him about her letters, her reminders that we were raising a man, not a child, and he listened, really listened, the way he hadn't in years. The days after the stadium incident were surreal. News outlets picked it up. Sports channels replayed the moment endlessly. Not the humiliation of the beer, but the revelation of Waldo Cruz, the legend hidden in plain sight, the father who chose family over fame. Commentators debated my decision, some praising my sacrifice, others questioning why I had kept it hidden from my son. But none of that mattered, because in the quiet of my home, Gregory was different. He came over daily, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to talk, sometimes to help in the garden where I planted marigolds along the back fence. The Tesla that once roared arrogantly into my driveway now arrived gently, quietly, like a son returning to where he belonged. One evening he admitted the full truth. His business hadn't just faltered, it had collapsed. He had been living on borrowed money, leased cars, and illusions of success. I thought if I looked the part, he confessed, his voice shaking, if I dressed rich, drove rich, lived rich, then I would be rich. But inside, I was drowning. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time, I saw not the arrogant businessman, but the scared boy who had once clung to my leg on his first day of school. You don't need to pretend anymore, I told him. The world may not always be kind, but it will always respect honesty, and so will I. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Gregory began to rebuild, not just his career, but his character. He started volunteering with youth football programs, showing kids the fundamentals, and one evening he admitted, I finally understand why you never told me about your career. If I had known, I would have coasted on your legacy instead of building my own. I hated you for being ordinary because I thought ordinary was failure. But now I see, it was strength. His words filled me with a quiet pride. The stadium humiliation that had once felt like death had become the turning point, the furnace where respect was reforged. He asked me to teach him, not about money or business, but about life, about balance, about how to be a man worthy of respect. Together we spent afternoons watching old game tapes, not so I could relive my glory, but so he could understand discipline, strategy, patience. And every time we paused the screen, I reminded him that the same lessons applied off the field. You read life the way a quarterback reads a defense. You anticipate, you adapt, and you never let arrogance blind you to the bigger picture. Slowly, his hardened edges softened, his pride gave way to humility, and our relationship, once shattered, began to heal like a bone broken but set correctly, stronger in the mending. But the world hadn't forgotten what happened at Sophie Stadium. Invitations poured in, interviews, talk shows, podcasts, even a documentary proposal. Some nights I sat with Gregory and showed him the requests, and he would shake his head. You don't owe them anything, Dad, he'd say. You've already given enough. And yet one evening he surprised me. But maybe you should tell your story. Not for fame, but for others, for fathers and sons like us who've lost respect and need to find it again. His words lingered, and I realized he was right. My story wasn't just ours anymore, it was universal. A story of sacrifice, misunderstanding, pride, pain, but ultimately reconciliation. A story that reminded people that behind every ordinary face could be an extraordinary journey, and behind every extraordinary achievement could be a choice to live for something greater. The final piece of healing came months later when Gregory asked if he could move back into the house for a while. Not forever, he said, but I need to remember where I came from. Watching him carry his bags into the same bedroom he had once stormed out of as a teenager filled me with emotions I couldn't name. That night, over a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, he raised his glass of water and said, "To ordinary men who turn out to be legends, and to fathers who never stop loving, even when their sons forget how to respect them." I clinked my glass against his, my chest tight with gratitude. Looking back now, I see the irony. The moment I thought would destroy me, the public humiliation at Sophie Stadium, became the very moment that saved us. Without it, Gregory would never have been stripped bare of his arrogance, never would have seen past the illusion of wealth, never would have realized that respect is not inherited, not demanded, not purchased. It is earned, and it is given freely only to those who live with integrity. That day, soaked in beer and shame, became the day my son learned what it meant to be a man, and I once again became not just his father, but his hero. And so if you're watching this now, remember, respect your parents, cherish their sacrifices, look beyond appearances, because the person you dismiss as ordinary may carry within them a story of greatness, a legacy of sacrifice, a quiet strength greater than any fame or fortune. Do not wait for humiliation to open your eyes. Do not wait for loss to teach you value. Learn now, while you still can, to honor the people who built the path beneath your feet. And finally, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own family, your own struggles, your own need for reconciliation, then I ask you from the bottom of my heart, please subscribe to Relative Revenge, share this story with others who need its lesson, like this video to help it reach more people, and leave a comment telling us what time it is where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories of pride, pain, redemption, and the power of respect. This is not just entertainment. It is a reminder that behind every ordinary life could be a hidden legend. Thank you for being here.